Hello, everyone. I wanted to make a quick presentation targeted at military and or government personnel PCS into Europe and considering shipping their US-spec electric vehicle. And I'm just a guy here in Germany with an EV, so even though much of the content of this brief applies to the entire EU, most of the anecdotal information is focused on my experiences here in Germany. Now, I work for the DoD, but this brief is my own brief, my own words, using my own opinions, and not endorsed or approved by the US government in any way. So, if you're a government lawyer, hopefully you're happy. Hey, I wanted to provide this information because the information wasn't out there when I needed it. So now that I've learned, I just wanted to share with the community, and hopefully somebody may benefit from this information. Um, I observed this topic becoming more and more of a challenge with the proliferation of EVs. And note that the EV environment is evolving rapidly in both the US and the EU. So I anticipate much of the information in this brief becoming obsolete within a few years. So keep in mind that this information is current as of December 2025. So if you're watching this 10, 15 years from now, almost nothing I say will probably be true anymore. So let's answer the question. Should you ship your US spec EV when you PCS to Europe? And it will depend on your situation. And I'll go into the details throughout this brief. But the short answer, for those who have ADD and don't want to stick to the whole brief, don't ship a US spec EV to Europe unless you have to. But if you have to, you can make it work, unless you have a Cybertruck. These vehicles are illegal in Germany, and the military has already put out an official statement banning them from being shipped and or registered over here. Okay, with that said, let's get into how to live with a US spec EV in Germany, starting with talking about the differences in the common charging standard. In Europe, CCS2 is king. You'll also see it online often referred to as Menikeys. I think it's how you pronounce it, but I never hear anybody call it that. Everybody just calls it Type 2 over here. And really, you're only going to find two different types of charging ports in EU spec vehicles, the CCS2 and the CHAdeMO. The CHAdeMO is kind of a dying breed over here in Europe. I think it is in the US as well. And I made a unscientific pie chart there, not supported by any real data, just based purely on my observation. And my observations indicate that more than 90% of the EVs on the road over here use some sort of Type 2 charging port. And I would say that's also reflective in the types of chargers you find out there in the DC fast charging network. I'd say less than 10%, maybe even 5%, offer a CHAdeMO charger. Now, having a CCS1 equipped US spec car will require some sort of adapter if you want to do any level 2 or level 3 charging. You can use the level 1 charger that came with your car, which I'm going to talk more about in a couple slides. But the good news is that level 1 charging is faster here in Germany. Much easier to live with just level 1 charging at home. Here's some bad news though. So let's say you have a newer Hyundai or Kia riding on the new eGMT platform with 800 volt architecture that allows you to charge at rates up to 230 kilowatts at your local Electrify America charger. Yeah, you can expect about half that speed while level 3 charging through an adapter over here. So using a CCS2 to CCS1 adapter, it slows your level 3 DC fast charging often to around 50% because of a bunch of nerdy details with CCS1 lower current limits. The amps are higher over here, and basically the adapter becomes a bottleneck. So expect about 50% charging rates. If you're getting 220, 230 in the States, yeah, you're going to get about 110 over here, 115. So if you do decide to invest in an adapter based on what you're going to be using your EV for, try to get a quality one. And do some research on it. Make sure it's got overcurrent protection, over voltage, under voltage, temperature monitoring, heat resistance. It's weatherproof, waterproof, short circuit protection, and make sure it's got a good locking mechanism on it too. You don't want it to come unplugged in the middle of a level 3 charge. That could be dangerous and cause damage. All right, so don't buy the cheapest thing you find on Temu. Get something that's got some quality. All right, let's talk about Teslas. Now, if you thought a Tesla was a Tesla, you're wrong. EU spec Teslas, They use CCS2. So if you have a US-spec Tesla with the Tesla, what we're now calling the NACS port, the North American Charging Standard, you're going to require an adapter. This is also true for newer EVs equipped in North America as they've switched over to the North American Charging Standard. Did they start that in 2024, 2025? But some of the newer EVs are coming out with that. So you will require an adapter. Here's what I don't know. I don't know if this also reduces your DC fast charging speeds. I have not had a chance to talk to anybody with a US spec Tesla over here and to find out if using an adapter like this reduces their DC fast charging rates. So keep that in mind. Let's talk quickly about CHAdeMO. Now, this category is probably the least affected by differences in being a US spec vehicle because CHAdeMO is CHAdeMO. Now, I used to think that CHAdeMO was a relic just holding on to support the Nissan Leafs and the Renault Zoes still on the road until I just recently saw a new Lexus UX300E still equipped with CHAdeMO. So, yeah, there are still new vehicles out here. I think they're all Japanese vehicles. Nissan, I saw it on Lexus, still using CHAdeMO. If you're shipping a CHAdeMO equipped EV, the good news is CHAdeMO's CHAdeMO, and that you'll not need an adapter for DC fast charging if you consider 50 kilowatts fast. But you will need an adapter though for the level 2 charging for, and you'll need a Type 2 to J1772 adapter for that, for the AC side. Here's the bad news though. CHAdeMO chargers are kind of rare over here. I believe they are in the US as well, and they're slow by modern standards. So if you want access to the plethora of CCS2 chargers here in Europe and still charge slow, you can get an adapter, but they're expensive, but 100% optional. These can also be finicky, requiring a specific order of operation that you may have to connect it to the vehicle, wait for the green blinky light to switch to the other blinky light, then connect it to the charger before the blinky light stops. Do it in the right order of operations in the right amount of time before the charger decides it didn't have a good handshake with your car and terminates the charging session. So the verdict is that you can easily live with a US spec CHAdeMO equipped EV in Europe, but your road trips will require a little more planning to identify the rare, functioning, and available CHAdeMO chargers along the way. All right, let's talk level 1 charging. The level 1 charger that came with your car will work fine using a $5 plug adapter as long as your charger is dual voltage. And I can't imagine these days that any chargers aren't going to be dual voltage, but make sure to double check before plugging it into a German wall outlet. Level 1 charging is much better here in Germany than in the US due to German outlets pushing out 3-phase AC at up to 3.6 kilowatts, while US plugs limited to 1.8 kilowatts using single phase AC. Now, I have a colleague in the next office who brought his US spec Ioniq 5 over here, and he said that his car used to charge a little over 1 kilowatt in his garage back in the States and charges at about 3 kilowatts here in Germany. But he says his cheap plug adapter can get warm to the point where he doesn't trust leaving it charging unattended overnight. And if this is a concern of yours, you can buy an EU-spec level 1 charger off of Amazon DE over here for 100 to 200 euros, but you will need a Type 2 to J1772 adapter for that. But much easier to live with level 1 charging over here. And I'll talk a little bit more my specific case in a future slide. Okay, let's talk about registering your vehicle. Again, this just applies to registering it to the military system. Now, it's really not going to be much different than just registering an ICE vehicle, except that you won't be given any fuel rations or your card that you can use at SO stations. You will be issued an E-plate, just like all vehicles in Germany that are electric, that identifies electric vehicles in Germany. The only perks that come with having an E-plate are the occasional parking spots reserved for EVs only, or the nod of approval you might occasionally get when encountering an environmentalist on the road. Even with an E-plate, though, you're still required to put the green Umweltplakette in your windshield, which really just indicates the level of emissions your car puts out, which is required in larger cities with emission restrictions. You'd think with the E-plate that would be enough to indicate that you don't have emissions, but yeah, they still require it. German bureaucracy. Okay, let's talk my specific use case here, just to provide some context and some ideas on what it's going to cost over here for you. All right. First of all, Germany has some of the most expensive electricity in the EU. The average German in my area pays about 45 euro cents per kilowatt hour. Now, my 2024 rate, I don't know what my 2025 rate is. I have to find that out when I reconcile every year. But the bill I got a year ago was paying 28 euro cents a kilowatt hour. And the reason why I pay so much less than German citizens is, well, I don't pay taxes, and DoD ID card holders don't. You'll be required to register through the UTAP office, which is the Utility Tax Avoidance Program. You'll learn that when you come here and in process. But my Opel Zafira is a pig and only gets about 2 miles per kilowatt hour. And that's if I drive like a grandpa. And if I want to maintain that 2 kilowatt hour consumption on the Autobahn, yeah, I got to switch it to eco mode and hang out in the slow lane at 80 kilometers an hour behind the big rigs. Okay, so if I drive it like I used to with my ICE vehicle at 140, 150 kilometers an hour on the Autobahn, I'd be getting somewhere between 1 and 1.5 miles per kilowatt hour. And that's true for a lot of EVs. Once you get on the Autobahn and start going fast, the efficiency starts going down. But just wanted to share my mental model to understand EV efficiency if you don't already understand it. And this is my simple mental model. 2 miles per kilowatt hour would be like comparing a ICE vehicle that gets 20 miles to the gallon. 3 miles per kilowatt hour is like 30 miles per gallon. 4 miles per kilowatt hour, 40 miles per gallon, and so on and so forth. It's not a perfect comparison, but it helps the petrol burning traditionalists better understand EV efficiency. So as you can see, my car really isn't the most efficient. When I charge at home using my level 2 charger or my level 1, my energy costs are about 17 cents a mile. And if I charge at a DC or at a Tesla DC fast charger, that'll cost me about 26 cents a mile. And that's with a subscription, though, of course. The typical price I see in Germany when charging as a guest at a fast charger is about 79 euro cents per kilowatt hour, and which at the current conversion rates, that means it's about 92, 93 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's expensive to charge as a guest at a level 3 charger. And that would put me at about 47 cents a mile. Now, just to compare that to what it cost energy consumption per mile on my 2019 Ford Tornado that I got rid of to get the EV, you can see that the energy costs per mile are higher in my EV. But this is based on the current diesel fuel costs on post, which is currently $4.06 a gallon. So throughout most of my time, though, owning that Ford, diesel was almost always north of $5 a gallon. So it was more expensive as I owned the vehicle to drive it. Now, you can only get these fuel prices on post or at German Esso gas stations. But, I also don't have to pay for the 500 euro annual oil change and the other associated maintenance required for owning a modern diesel, which is a topic for a different presentation. The energy costs of my Opel Zafira are about as bad as it gets when it comes to modern EVs. So unless you're bringing a Hummer EV over here, your vehicle is likely to get much better efficiency, much more efficient than my vehicle is. So let this serve as a worst case scenario for most people. Your Tesla, Kia, Hyundai is likely to be much more efficient than my van. If you don't have the ability to charge your EV at home, this gives you an idea on what it will cost to charge a car on the economy. The bottom line is that energy cost per mile is usually more expensive for EVs in Germany when compared to on-post Esso fuel prices. Now, that's not the same for Germans. Look at the price they have to pay, and that's actually cheaper than it normally is because fuel prices are cheap right now globally. So, now, another thing to consider is those conducting road trips in their ICE vehicles still have to route plan around Esso stations if they want affordable fuel prices. Once you leave Germany, these special fuel prices are no longer available to you. And the same is true if you end up stationed in the UK, Italy, or Spain. Your fuel privileges are limited to that country. EVs aren't affected by energy costs when crossing the border on a road trip. So my 11 euro a month Tesla subscription gives me the reduced price across the EU. Now, a question that comes up, does the time of day affect your rate? Well, Germany hasn't implemented time of use rates that I'm aware of. Not in my area, I haven't seen it. So level 1, level 2 charging at home is going to be the same rate as it is at noon as it is at midnight. However, most DC fast chargers have reduced rates if you want to charge in the middle of the night. And this varies by location, but my local Tesla charger usually charges me 44 euro cents per kilowatt hour with my subscription, but I can get that as low as 22 cents per kilowatt hour if I want to charge between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. And that's actually cheaper than what I pay per kilowatt hour at home. Okay, let's talk about wall boxes. you decide you need one. Now, it's rare to find a rental property with a wall box or level 2 charging. If this is important to you, this is something you're going to need to negotiate with your landlord. Now, it was easier to sell your landlord on this while the German government was still giving grants to install these, but that program ended last year in 2024. So, whereas wall boxes in the US are typically limited to 7 kilowatts, unless it's a commercial property with three-phase AC, wall boxes in Germany start at 11 kilowatt hour. So you can get a 22 kilowatt wall box for just a few euro more, but it requires a permit to ensure that the wiring and the power grid can handle it. But a 22 kilowatt wall box over here, if you look at like Amazon D prices, it's only a few euros more. It's almost the same price. So it really just can, the wiring and the setup you have can support it. Now remember, it's much easier to live with level 1 charging over here in Germany with almost 3 times the speed when compared to US level 1 charging. So you may do just fine living without a wall box. My Opel Zafira, it has the larger 75 kilowatt hour battery, and it would take me about 24 hours to go from 5% to 90% charge. Um, I recently did install a wall box earlier this month, and I can now do the same charge in just a few hours. But it did cost me over 3,000 euros to install it, so I'm not sure yet if the convenience is worth it. Uh, if you have a US-spec EV, you will need an adapter. You can use the CCS2 to CCS1 adapter that you'd use for your DC level 3 fast charging, or you can get just a Type 2 to J1772 adapter just for your level 2. All right, let's talk about the charging infrastructure over here in Germany. So overall, level 3 charging network across Germany is much better than what I remember it being in the US. Of course, I haven't been in the US since January 2023, so you guys can tell me if I'm out of touch and the environment has changed significantly. But my experience in the US was finding a level 3 charger at the edge of an empty parking lot next to an abandoned warehouse, only to find that 2 of the 4 chargers were out of order, 1 was occupied, and the one that worked only put out half the advertised power because it was feeding the car next to you. Now, the charging stations here in Germany, all the ones that I've come across, are usually co-located with other amenities like restaurants, rest stops, hotels, gas stations, and there are usually several available and functional. Okay. Now, I know people look forward to the day when you can just pull up and pay the credit card like you can at a gas pump. But just like the US, you either have to download an app or scan a QR code to interface with the charging stations over here. Now, most of the charges can be paid with via Apple Pay or some other payment method, credit cards, such. But here's the thing: is I've had some challenges using my U.S. credit cards, specifically USAA. If you have a USAA credit card or other card that requires you to verify a transaction via the app, by the time you can confirm, the charging station has already given up and decided it couldn't use your billing method and cancels the charging session. So I had to fiddle with mine a bit and link it to a German bank account in order to avoid it having me confirm through USAA in the app. So it worked fine once I did that. But the first time I tried charging in the cold, it was frustrating. If you're going to be road tripping often, I highly recommend establishing a subscription and getting your payment method ironed out beforehand and test it out on a local charger before your adventure. All right, let's talk the conclusion here and the key considerations that I've come up with. And again, this applies to both US and EU spec EVs over here. And the first consideration I would advise anyone wanting an EV is whether or not you have the ability to charge at home. Without this ability, the EV ownership becomes both inconvenient and expensive. Now, most civilian employees in the graded GS11 and above are entitled to living quarters allowance, called LQA. And soldiers residing off post receive overseas housing allowance, OHA, and it's a little bit different on utilities for soldiers with OHA. You can either get your lease included with utilities, and in this situation I'm going to talk about here would apply. Otherwise, you get a separate utilities allowance, and it's on you. But here, for civilians and LQA, utilities are part of your LQA allotment, and these entitlements have a cap based on your grade, rank, location, and any portion of the LQA entitlement not used are forfeited, which incentivizes everyone to get the most they can afford. Now, if you have a little bit of wiggle room in there, and being that you have to reconcile your utility bills annually, which includes electricity, I haven't seen anything in the regulations that preclude energy costs associated with charging an EV. So you could charge in theory, charge your vehicle at home and then reconcile your electric bill, which it just gets covered by your LQA as long as you're under your cap. And you could, in theory, pay nothing out of pocket for per mile energy costs. Um, if you live on post housing or with a driveway and or a garage, you can charge your vehicle using the electricity provided by the government. So another situation. Now, this could be difficult for soldiers, airmen living in stairwell housing where you don't have access to an outlet. But if you're on post housing, you have access to an outlet. Yeah, I see people doing it, and nothing's come out saying you can't. Um, Here's another thing, though, kind of a pain in the butt. Over-the-air updates applies to pretty much all modern vehicles, not just EVs. And if you have a modern US-spec vehicle that relies on over-the-air updates, start researching now how you can install them manually, as the eSIM is not likely to be compatible with the cellular network over here. So if you rely on a subscription through your OEM for certain features that your car offers, research now how those might be impacted. If you purchase an EU-spec car, understand that it's difficult to download apps if you have a US account or US credit card tied to your account. In my case, Apple, it's darn near impossible for me to download the My Opel app, which would give me the ability to precondition my batteries and check on state of health and such, which I don't have through the infotainment. So, and I haven't figured out how to crack that code yet. Now, circling back to the original question of whether or not it's a good idea to ship a US-spec EV to Europe, it really does depend on your situation and your intended use. And I hope this information helps inform you on what the right choice is for you in your situation. But really ask yourself, is this going to be your primary vehicle? Um, it's much easier to live with a Generation 1 Nissan Leaf if it's just going to be your second car as the grocery getter and the errand runner for local uh, commuting. Will you need access to the level 3 charging network? Will you be taking long road trips often, or will this be, you know, just your second car? Remember, most people tend to overestimate the range they actually need, along with overestimating the length and frequency of their road trip requirements. So, at the time of this recording, the EV used market has some incredible deals in both the US and the European markets. So, I know it might be tempting to go get that steal of a deal down the road and bring it over here with you, but there are deals waiting for you here in Europe too. So, if you've decided on owning an EV in Europe, it's best to purchase one here, tax free. And just to give you an example on my situation, my Opel Zafira with larger 75 kilowatt hour battery pack, which was a €6,000 option, it had an MSRP in 2023 of €64,000. And I got it 2.5 years old, 30,000 kilometers, which is about 25,000 miles, and still had the new car smell. I got it for €24,000. And there are other even better deals. Sometimes it blows me away to see how much EVs have depreciated over here as well. So if you want an EV, there's a cheap deal waiting here for you. Um, I would not recommend purchasing a new EV here in Europe. It would likely depreciate beyond what you could sell it for before your tour is up. And you can't take EU-spec vehicles back to the States with you unless they're 25 years old and meet certain other requirements. Now, the companies over here that sell US-spec cars through discounted military or diplomat sales programs such as MAS, Volvo, BMW, etc., they don't offer their EV models, likely due to the reasons listed throughout this brief. They will, however, gladly sell you a hybrid, which in my opinion is the worst of both worlds, but the hybrid might be right for some people, but getting a pure battery electric vehicle isn't offered through the military diplomat sales programs over here. Also be aware how difficult it might be to get your US spec vehicles serviced over here, especially under warranty. So, an example, my ex-wife, she has a new VW Atlas, and that model isn't offered over here. That's targeted the US market. The VW dealership over here had a very difficult time servicing it under warranty and addressing the recalls for that vehicle. So keep that in mind when you bring a US spec vehicle over here. So really the only reasons I can think of to justify shipping your US spec EV to Europe would be, one, you owe way more than it's worth and you're stuck with it. Two, you're in a lease you can't get out of. Or three, you're attached to it and it's part of the family. So other than that, that is all I have, and I hope this information was helpful for you.